What's my goal? That's the question my guest, Jason Frishman, asks himself all day long to stay mindful of how he's engaging with others and keep his emotional impulses in check. This part of the episode really resonated with me, and I've begun incorporating this into my own routine. As you'll hear in this week's discussion, Jason shares a number of powerful tips and perspectives, often rooted in his neuroscience background, that can help us better navigate self-doubt and grow our confidence. I love this episode, and I'm so excited to share it with you. Thanks again for listening and sharing with anyone else you think might benefit. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Menninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help women and others overcome imposter syndrome and advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest to share how they've navigated self-doubt to achieve success. The more we share our stories, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us. Thank you so much for listening and sharing. Welcome, Jason. I am so excited for us to have this conversation today. And I know you and I have sort of started this conversation already, but I'm really glad to take it to the listening audience. And before we jump in, I would love to just invite you to introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited for this topic of discussion. My name's Jason Frishman. I'm the founder of Netcapital, and my background is initially in neuroscience, but I've since founded a company that helps private companies raise capital and helps investors invest in innovative private companies.
And I want to talk a little bit about how you and I met, right? And how this conversation started. So you and I had an opportunity to be part of a recent TEDx event. We both did the TEDxBabsonCollege event about a month ago now. And I'd love to hear your interpretation of this as well. But I remember that when I talked about doing a topic related to imposter syndrome, your reaction was, I almost did that too, and that you really connected with that. And that's kind of what brought us down this road. But I'd love to hear more about your experience and, how you got to this conversation.
It's so funny. It was so applicable because I had just done the company had grown a lot during the pandemic, and because we're a digital tool. And so being able to interact online in doing private securities offerings was really valuable when the pandemic hit. And so we ended up growing a lot, and I hadn't met a lot of my team members in person. And so I had just come back from an event that we did in Colorado where we would all get to meet together in person for the first time. And it became really clear to me, we have a pretty young team, and it became kind of clear that a lot of people on the team were suffering from imposter syndrome. And not everybody from the team came to the event. And so when I came back, I had planned this spiel to give at our all hands meeting about imposter syndrome and about how I understand that firsthand. And, especially when it comes to customer interactions, because if you work at a company and you're interacting with a customer who isn't familiar with your company, and they start asking you questions, sometimes, especially when you're younger, but even older, you start to feel uncomfortable, like maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, or maybe this is a good question. Maybe I don't have a good answer for this question, but it's really important to realize that you are the expert. This is what you do every day for your job. You do know the answers to these questions. Don't get thrown off the line because some difficult customer is asking you hard questions. You need to really hold the line, understand that you know your material, and appreciate that you're more of an expert in this field than the person you're talking to almost always when you're in that service provider to customer interaction. And I told the team that I was feeling imposter syndrome right now because it was a week before our TED Talk event. And I'm like, I'm about to give a TED Talk on the wealth gap in this country. Like, who am I to talk about something so important and critical and wide spanning? And so I expressed that I was feeling imposter syndrome. And I was actually really struggling with how I wanted to go about the talk. And the next day I was talking to two of my team members who were sort of helping me put together my slide deck. And I was like, maybe I should just do the talk on imposter syndrome. What about that? They're like, you should definitely do that. You know so much about it. And then I get to the event and you're giving the talk right before me and your topic is imposter syndrome. I just thought it was so funny.
Well, I remember just being so impressed about your willingness to say that out loud to your team in particular, because so many people still carry that around like a deep, dark secret. There's still a stigma attached to it, even though most of us now have heard the term, we all kind of know what it means, but we still feel like it's this shameful thing. And so I was really grateful that you were willing to name it for your own experience, but to also let people know, hey, this is normal and here's how to think about it. Tell me more about your own experience, because here you are, you're leading this company. You mentioned neuroscience. Maybe there's an intuitive connection between neuroscience and what you do today, but I don't know it. So what was it like for you to make that kind of a transition? And, how does imposter syndrome show up for you?
Well, I think that neuroscience is applicable to anything because it's really just the understanding of the human brain and the human condition. And that's really all we all do all day anyways, is try to interact with each other and provide value to each other. So it is applicable in a roundabout way, but I did medical oncology research at Dana-Farber. I worked in a cognitive neuroscience lab for a bit at the University of Miami. And it wasn't the path for me. It wasn't the career path for me. And so when I started Netcapital, I'll spare the long story of how I got there. But when I started it, I was pretty young. I was in my early 20s. And my core team was basically most people were in their early 30s. And then one of the key members of the team was maybe around 60. And there's a lot of imposter syndrome that you experience when you're a 22-year-old, 23-year-old kid, really just out of college. I spent my whole career in medical labs, and now I'm running a fintech company with a collection of people who were really smart and had much more experience than me. And you definitely run into that problem of, well, why should they listen to me? Like, why should I be in this position? Why do I really have the ability or the know-how or the confidence to be able to impact the company in the way that I want to and impact the people? Because ultimately, it's really just about people. We're a collection of people trying to accomplish a common goal. And it's my job to sort of set the vision, set the course, and keep everybody rowing in that direction as best I can. And that was definitely a struggle for me in the early days, not just internally, but also externally. I was really fortunate that I got a great group of angel investors into my business at a very early time. But, going into a meeting with the founder of DraftKings or the founder of Napster or the president of Fidelity or the head of Blackstone, and as a 23-year-old kid, this is my business and you should invest in it. You should want this equity. I probably felt more imposter syndrome in those interactions than I did with my internal team. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who was also entrepreneurial, and he was just like, look, you'll end up doing this so many times that there isn't going to be a question that will be asked of you that you don't already know the answer to, that you haven't already heard before. Just keep doing it. Keep your head down. You know your business. Nobody knows your business better than you. Be confident in the material. Demonstrate that you're a subject matter expertise just by being yourself, and it's going to go well. And that's how it works. And just over time, it just got easier and easier, but it never goes away, right? The TED Talk was a month ago, a month to the day. And I was feeling imposter syndrome right up until the moment I walked on stage.
I can relate to that as well. I agree with you. I don't think it ever goes away, but I also think that it's a sign that we're stretching ourselves, right? Because if everything is always comfortable, we're probably not taking risks. We're probably not growing, right? So in some ways, I think of that feeling of imposter syndrome or the anxiety that creeps in as a way, is almost like a reminder that, okay, you're still challenging yourself, right? You're not getting too complacent. And that actually makes me feel better about it.
Yeah, I think I know exactly what made me feel better about it. I've always been pretty aware of it. And I told you the story, I think, when we first met, what the moment that was most salient to me about this was, when you're a kid, you just expect that people who are in positions of authority anywhere know what they're doing. And like, if you go to a store, like if you go to like CVS and you ask the guy at CVS, like, hey, where's the Reese's? They should just know because they're the CVS guy, right? Like, who else would know if not the CVS guy? And I have an older brother, and I used to have this thought up until my older brother started working at CVS. And I was like, wait, you're the CVS guy? You don't know anything. You don't care about this at all. You just rolled out of bed this morning and were like, oh, I have to go to work. And you realize, like, wow, nobody really knows what they're doing. Like, nobody really understands why they're doing what they're doing, like at that level. And you know, you hear fake it till you make it. And I don't want to say that I fake it to make it, but I think once you realize that nobody's more together than you are, like nobody really has it together that way. Even the most successful people still don't have it together that way. And once you realize that nobody feels that confident, I think I grew more confident in my unconfidence. Like in my imposter syndrome, I felt more confident, like, okay, that's fine. I'm just feeling this way. I'll just get through it. I've done this 100 times before. I'll do it again. It's a good feeling. It means I'm stretching myself. I'm not going to worry about it. I think that really helped me feel more confident when I realized that everybody deals with this.
I think that's such a great point. And I think about that a lot too. And I can't remember if I shared this with you when we were talking, but one of the things that I often think about is that series on Netflix, The Toys That Made Us. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's this documentary on basically toy companies, toys that were popular back in the day and how they got to be where they are. And it talks about the ups and downs of the toy experience. And it gives you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. And so they would encounter a certain conflict or a certain challenge, and then they'd have to scramble to make something up in order to fill a gap or address a particular challenge. And as I was watching that, I was thinking to myself, so many of us think that other people have it all figured out and that we just are somehow, we don't have access to the same rule book that other people have. And then watching that show in particular made me realize everybody's just making it up. Like you said, right? There's no master rule book that other people have access to that you don't. It's all about just creating in the moment, being able to dance in the moment of whatever situation that you're in. And I think if we can recognize that, it takes a lot of the pressure off.
100%. And it made me really appreciate my mom a lot more. When you're a kid, your parents, you think your parents know what's going on. And my parents divorced when I was very young, and my mom, I have the best mother in the world, and she raised me and my brother basically on her own. And, I would ask her questions and I just expect the answer. Who knows if she did or didn't, but she would give me the answer and that would be satisfying. And, now that I'm, that in my upper 20s and thinking about that myself, it's like, I'm not ready for that. I mean, not that I'm having a kid anytime soon, as far as I know, but I'm not ready for all that. Like, how do you know what to do? It's just, you go through your whole life doing things that you've never done before. And the first time you do anything new, it's so natural to feel like unsure of what the right procedure is. But when you do it, you just figure it out as long as you stay confident. Like, that's my secret, is stay confident. Stay confident in yourself. Like, I'm confident in my own ability to navigate situations even when I'm uncomfortable. And there's a difference. You can be uncomfortable and confident. Some people struggle with that. Some people, they start to feel uncomfortable and then they lose their confidence. They feel uncomfortable, they're not okay. They feel uncomfortable, they get anxious. They feel uncomfortable, they get jittery. They feel uncomfortable, they start being emotional, stop being logical. I think my key is, if I'm uncomfortable, I stay calm and I stay confident in my own ability to navigate the situation. And I think that's what helps me when I'm feeling that way, is remaining confident in myself. Easier said than done, of course, but that's what I strive to do. Whether or not I do it every time, each time's different.
Well, I really appreciate that perspective too, because what you're saying in my interpretation is that your confidence is anchored more to your resourcefulness and to the fact that you believe that you can handle it, that you don't necessarily know what the situation will bring, but that whatever it is, you have navigated other uncertain situations in the past and have been able to handle those. So why would this time be dramatically different? And I think for many of us, our confidence is tied to the context. And so if I'm not perfect at this, if I'm not a subject matter expert, then that self-doubt creeps in. And to your point, then I start to experience fight or flight. And then it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think that really just keeping that meta level of confidence of like, I know how to learn, right? I know how to do new things, right? Like that goes a long way.
Yeah, I think that there's two types of imposter syndrome that are slightly different. The first is, at least from you're the expert, but that I've experienced, like the first is I'm doing something new that I don't feel super confident about or super comfortable with because I've never done it before. I've just never done this before. And that makes me out of my comfort zone. And then I start to think like, why me? But when you start to shift your perspective to, well, why not me? Why shouldn't I be able to do this if others are? Why shouldn't I be giving a TED talk? Why not me? Right? Like somebody obviously thinks that I have something interesting to say, or they wouldn't have invited me to do it. And so why not? Why am I doubting myself, or why am I feeling uncomfortable doing something that other people feel like I would be really good at? And so I think that's one type of imposter syndrome that I've experienced, and that's where the staying and remaining confident and sure of myself, even in the face of discomfort, is really important. And then the other type of imposter syndrome, which is sort of more what you talked about during your talk, as far as I understood it, is more like being in your place of business, being in your profession on a day-to-day life, and still feeling like I shouldn't be here, or I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't know enough to be good at my job. And that's different because that's feeling uncomfortable in a routine as opposed to feeling uncomfortable out of a routine. And that's the type of imposter syndrome that I was seeing in my team when we were in Colorado on this corporate retreat. That gave me a lot of concern, because if you feel uncomfortable because there's some new event like a TED talk that you've never done before, that makes a lot of sense to me. If you feel uncomfortable in your daily life doing your job and like you shouldn't be there, that struck me as something that needs to be attended to, and why you're feeling that way. Why are you feeling uncomfortable in your daily life, right? I think that's where it needs to be. You need to be really thoughtful about yourself and why you're feeling that way.
I think that's a really good distinction. And I think what comes up for me as you're saying that is the social comparison piece, right? In the story that I told, I was talking about the fact that I couldn't get past the fact that the people around me seemed, in my mind, so much smarter. And so I was constantly comparing myself to other people and feeling like that person's more worthy, that person knows more than I do. I love what you were saying earlier too about you're the expert in your role just by virtue of the fact that you're the one who does it every day. You're not an expert in everything, right? And you're not expected to be. But I think sometimes we have these really unrealistic expectations of how much we're supposed to know or what we're supposed to know. And so I'm curious from your perspective too, as somebody who started a company at such a young age, had people who were more seasoned, more experienced, like that could have easily been something that you would fall into. So were you, when you were starting out, were you finding yourself making those kinds of comparisons? And how did you move past that? Like, how did you reframe what expert means and how much expertise you actually have to have in order to successfully do your job?
I think for me, it's a few things. I mean, I've always been confident in my intelligence. That's never been something that I've personally struggled with. I always did good in school. I only got one B in my life, and there was a personal vendetta with this professor that she had on me. And so that was never a problem for me. But I think what was more of a problem was it was more like getting those people to believe me, or, I was doing something very revolutionary. Like our business is born out of a change in legislation. And so nothing like what we're doing existed until we started doing it. companies couldn't raise money in this way until there was this change in law. And so, walking into the room with the president of Fidelity and explaining this new way that private companies and investors can interact in the capital markets, and basically educating people who are very well plugged in and very successful and very wealthy, and hearing them be not only open to it, but appreciative. Like, thank you for bringing this to me. This is really interesting. And being invited to educate law firms on this new change in law. And I think just more and more validation. I had natural confidence, but I think as you experience that external validation, it just sort of makes you feel more secure. And that's something that I coach to any entrepreneur. It's really helpful to get that external validation at some point so that you're not like this crazy person in a basement, like with your own crazy ideas, thinking that you're going to change the world. But if you can't get anyone to vote, especially with their checkbook, to invest in you, then you can't really be sure, because it's so easy when you give somebody your startup idea or your company idea, everybody says, oh yeah, like that's great, Kim, you should definitely go do that. Like, it's so easy to say that in response, but okay, but how about you invest in it? Oh, you think it's a great idea? Well, okay, show me, right? Invest in it. Here's my Netcapital offering. Go put even $100 into it. And then I'll feel more sure of myself that what I'm doing isn't crazy. And so that's, I think, how I dealt with it. And I struggled with my first team, like the early members of the team. And I don't really know how much of that was imposter syndrome related. I think there were a lot of factors, but I learned a lot from my experiences. And so that when we grew the team from 5 to 10 to 20 to 30 and beyond, I had valuable lessons under my belt on how I wanted the relationship between me and somebody reporting to me, or a partner or a colleague, and how those relationships should go. I think where imposter syndrome often crops up is when we lose control of the process and we feel unsure of where to go next. And I see this a lot with my team, especially recently. Our customers are CEOs of companies. We're typically, sometimes CFOs, but we're typically dealing with the CEO or the CFO of a private company, helping them get listed on the platform to raise capital. So you're a 24-year-old out of college, had maybe 1 or 2 jobs, and now you're working at Netcapital, and it's your job to help this CEO write their offering page and how to write a compelling story that's going to work with our tens of thousands of investors on Netcapital. I think where the imposter syndrome starts to creep up is you feel like, I'm talking to the CEO of this company and I'm trying to help them present their company. Maybe I don't know, like maybe they're right, but they're not right. They're not right, because we do know. We work with hundreds of companies. We've seen this over and over and over again. We know the pitfalls that these companies fall into. We know the way that CEOs think about their own businesses, right? It's like their little baby. So even the little pinky toe of your baby is so special and so important, but it's not to an investor who you only have 60 seconds, if that, to grab their attention and make them want to read more. And that's where I think I see imposter syndrome creep up in day to day, at least with my team, is they feel like they're talking to somebody who is more successful than them and has a greater stature. And 2, when you start to lose control of the process, when you're dealing with a customer or a service provider who's trying to take control. In CEOs, we can't help ourselves, right? We just like inevitably have that instinct to, okay, this is how we're going to do things. Like, no, this is how we're going to do things. And I understand that I'm not the CEO of your company, but you're listing on our platform and this is how we do things because this is most successful. And it's hard to do that. And I think that's where sometimes people start to falter with imposter syndrome and think, oh, wait, well, maybe we should do it your way. Maybe that is good, but it's not. I mean, sometimes it is, but like typically, the typical answer is hold the line, stick with the process, trust the process, trust your own instincts as a professional, and get to a good result.
Well, oh gosh, there's so many great things that you said there. And I want to go back to what you were talking about of your business came out of new legislation. And so you're having these conversations with these very senior, very successful people. And I can see how it would be easy to be intimidated by that. But what you're pointing out, which I think is really important for everybody, especially who have that kind of status intimidation, is that just because they are successful in their company or in their space does not mean that they are experts in everything else. And what you described too was, I'm bringing something to you that has value. I'm coming to you from a place of service. Yes, it benefits me as a business owner as well, but I think about this a lot in terms of just everyday interactions in our organization. So many of us are so afraid of what do I have to bring to this very senior person or this very important person? But everything that we do has value of some kind. And so to really be emphasizing that makes you feel more confident that you can trust, I'm not in control of their response, but I can feel confident that I'm bringing something of value to this conversation and that they have a certain level of expertise based on their position, but I have expertise in what I'm talking about right now. And I think that that's something that we need to hold on to that very easily flies out the window when we find ourselves in uncomfortable situations. I also think, to your point, that when we find ourselves in those kind of interactions where someone else is trying to exert their authority, or, there is also that temptation to say, wow, well, I don't know if I have the legitimacy, or do I have the right to push back on someone that's as important as you are. But to own that expertise, and even to name it, and I don't know if you would agree with this, but I think sometimes to even say to somebody, look, I respect your expertise and I know that you know what you're doing, but I also want to share with you that there's a reason why we do things this way, right? And to maybe even establish that I know you're accustomed to being the one in charge here, but I want to explain to you why we do things the way we do them, right? But to at least have and that's where I think the leadership can come in too, is to say, hey, look, you have the authority to set that boundary. You have the authority to say to somebody who's maybe pushing inappropriately that this is how we do things around here. And I think a lot of times people don't hear that message. And so there's that confusion of, do I actually have the legitimacy and the power to hold the line?
Right. And the reason to do that is to get to the right result for everyone.
Yes.
We know this is the best path because we've done this hundreds of times. The person you're working with, likely it's their first time, maybe second time. They aren't experts in this. We are, and it's our job. We're failing if we let a customer tell us what to do, because we're letting the customer fail. And what I say to the team as well, and you mentioned this just now, if you're a service provider, you're getting paid to provide the service. So why would your customer pay you and then tell you what to do? They either value the service you're providing or they don't. And if they don't, that's okay. We can part friends. Look, if you're uncomfortable with this process, I understand it's not for everyone. We can part friends. It's not a problem. But if you are comfortable with this process, if you want to work with us, this is the path to be most successful. I promise you, it's the path. I'm not going to promise success. I can't guarantee success, but this is the best path to give us the best possibility for success. And then the other thing that you mentioned about being intimidated by people who are really successful or really smart is, I've found that very successful and very smart people that I've interacted with are actually the most eager to learn. And if you're bringing something that's interesting or unique, and you should believe that you are, because all of us are interesting and all of us are unique. And often that really just stems from your own confidence in whether or not you are interesting and bringing something unique. My experience is they're very eager to hear the story and to understand. I mean, some people that I've had some meetings where, the meeting starts with the CEO of a very large company and they say, I have 10 minutes, make it quick. And that's a very different meeting than another meeting. But, you just got to roll with those punches and you got to do the best you can with the circumstances and trust yourself that you'll be able to navigate those sorts of situations. Well, that's how I've handled it.
And what I really like about that too is because it makes a distinction between the person that you're talking about as being successful and smart and open is also somebody that I think is confident in themselves. And a lot of times we're responding to other people's insecurities. People who are confident and secure in themselves don't need to be the smartest person in the room, don't need to bully and intimidate other people, don't need to take people down with them, right? And so I think a lot of times in certain organizations, if there's a toxic culture or there's certain personality types that get rewarded inappropriately, we associate power with intimidation. And true confidence, true success is quiet, right? It's not flexing of the muscles. And so the thing that I think about, the reason why I say that and why I think it's important to call out is you cannot control someone else's behavior. There's nothing we can do about that. But when you see it, you can know what's happening and not make it about you. Right. So if someone's treating me that way, it's not because I'm not good at my job. It's not because I don't have the right level of expertise. It's because that particular individual has their own issues to deal with, right?
Or had a bad day, or like they're sick, or like there's a million different things that could be happening that's causing some sort of toxic or poor relationship or interaction. But one of my very first investors when I started my company, one of the conditions of them investing was that I go to professional sales training class. And I thought that was strange, but I was excited about it. He was going to pay for it and as part of his investment. And sure, like I'm eager to learn. And it was a great experience for me. And I think it helped give me some tools to deal with these sorts of things. And one of the big themes of this was called Sandler sales training, was the type of training that it was. That's like the school of thought. And one of the big themes is separating I from role. So understanding that when you're in a role, we're all just playing roles. Like you're different, Kim, when you're in this interview with me than when you're at home alone with like your best friend or your partner, right? Like you're in a different role and you act differently. And if you're in your role as a professional, as a salesperson, as a CEO, as a leader, whatever the case may be, you're in that role. And if you experience some sort of toxicity or you make somebody mad or somebody's really upset at you, you're working retail and they're yelling at you, they're not mad at you, the person, Kim. They're mad at the sales clerk at CVS, right? Like they don't even care who you are, which I know sounds dramatic, but it's true. Like you don't care. You're never going to think about them again. They're like NPCs in the real world video game. Like you're never, they just don't exist. They do a role and you're mad at them in the role because the barista at Starbucks, I told them I wanted oat milk and they gave me regular milk. How dare they? They're not mad at you as a person. They're mad at you in this role. And it's a really important skill for us to separate I from role and to realize that when I'm having those interactions, they are not mad at me. They're not attacking my character because I gave whole milk instead of oat milk. They're upset with me in my role. I made a mistake in my role, and that is something that I can fix. So let me stay calm, stay composed, ask myself, what is my goal? And then take the actions to accomplish that goal. And that's how I personally have dealt with those sorts of stressful situations myself. But separating I from role, I think, is a really helpful lesson that some people really struggle with and take things very personally.
I think that's such a great thing for many of us to keep in mind for that reason. Like you said, a lot of this self-doubt and negative self-talk comes from over-personalizing very impersonal interactions with people, and to just remind ourselves of that. And I think, separating I from role is, I always joke with the people I support, put the stickies, right? Put the visual reminders, whatever you need to remind yourself of. I think that's another one that goes on a sticky note because I think it's a great thing to think of. It's, something we might intellectually recognize, but in the moment it goes out the window. So keep it nearby.
For sure. And emotion is just not your friend in those circumstances usually. And I think we do a really bad job as a society of being empathetic when that happens. Like the reason why this person's blowing up at you because you put whole milk instead of oat milk probably has nothing to do with the milk. They probably had a really bad day, or they're running late to some important meeting, or they got really bad news. And we're so incapable of empathizing with those people in that moment. We just feel attacked and we get defensive. And it's like, there's like some old saying where like, if I cut somebody else off on the road, it's because I really had to do it. Like I had a really important turn that I was going to miss if I didn't do it. But if somebody cuts me off on the road, they are a word I probably shouldn't say on your podcast. Right. And like we human condition is to evaluate those situations in such a warped way where we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt always, and we very rarely give the other person the benefit of the doubt. It's always bad intentions if it's them. It's always the best intentions if it's us, not for everyone, but generalizing. And I think that's another thing that has helped me is being like, okay, like you're clearly upset. That's okay. I won't take it personally. I'm not going to stoke the fire. Let's talk tomorrow. Like maybe tomorrow will be a better day for us to handle this. Sometimes it's not. Like I don't mean to say this like I've dealt with every conflict perfectly my entire life. Like I screwed this up all the time. Like this stuff is hard. Conflict is difficult, and there's no like one size fits all solution to conflict management. And I still feel apprehensive when I have to go resolve conflict. So, it's just, these are sort of the things that go through my head when I think about what conflict. The question I just like to ask myself is, take a step back. What's my goal?
Yeah. Oh, it's so powerful. And I'm seeing some of the neuroscience in that too, right? Like I do have the benefit of perspective that maybe others don't have. And my background's in psychology, so I kind of see the world in a similar lens too.
That's why we're friends.
Exactly. But I'm curious, as we wrap up, because I could talk to you all day, but I know we're running short on time here, are there any other, not to put you on the spot, but are there any other sort of brain shortcuts that we should be thinking about when it comes to interacting with other people or managing confidence or self-doubt? Like from the neuroscience perspective, I just think that's such a powerful skill set or perspective to bring. And I wonder if there's anything else that you are aware that you go to when you find yourself in stressful moments.
Yeah, I think most of my techniques I've already described, so let me re-emphasize them.
Sure.
Because I don't want to overwhelm, but I legitimately ask myself, what's my goal multiple times a day, particularly in a stressful situation, not just work related, like at all times. I think it's the single most important question that we need to ask ourselves on a daily basis. And when you think of goal setting, people usually think like, oh, I want to be happy, like some big amorphous goal. I'm saying, no, what is my goal with this sentence I'm writing in this email? What is my goal with these words that I'm about to say to this person who screwed up my Starbucks order? Like, what's my goal? And then how do I act in a way that is most likely to accomplish my goal without like feeding my emotional need? Because we get wrapped up in this emotional need to be like heard and validated and cared for, but it really doesn't matter. Like that, like we should be able to control our own emotions and just accomplish our goal. If my goal is just to get the barista to remake my coffee order, I can probably accomplish that a lot better by being calm than by reaming them out and yelling at them about how stupid they are and how terrible of a barista they are and how they should go quit or whatever, right? Like how's that going to help me accomplish my goal at all? So that's my number one technique, is ask myself, what is my goal? And then the second is realizing that nobody has their shit together. It's really helpful for me. Like, and instead of asking why me, say, why not me? Why you? Why you? Right? Like, why not me? Why me? Why you? Why any of us? Why are we all here? Right? Like nobody knows any of the answers to any of these questions. So let's just go do it and stop worrying about it. What's the worst that can happen? I mean, that's the other thing I like to ask myself a lot. And maybe that's neuroscience related or not, but I'm very like scale oriented. So if I'm making a decision, what's the best possible outcome and what's the worst possible outcome? And I love to make choices where the best possible outcome is something really good and the worst possible outcome is something relatively neutral. Like the TED Talk. The best possible outcome is this talk goes over great. It gets millions of views. It becomes this great marketing thing. It helps Netcapital get to the next level. And the worst possible outcome is I totally screw it up. I trip and fall. on my way to the stage. I become like a meme. Who knows? Who cares? Like, what's actually negative about it? Like, nothing bad can happen from that. Like, that might even be good publicity. Who knows? I stumble over where I say something bad. Okay, I'll never use it again, and it's a waste of a day. Okay, like, that's not that bad of an outcome. So I like to think of things that way and try to make choices in that direction, where the best possible outcome is something really great, and the worst possible outcome is something that's really not that bad in the scheme of things.
Wow, those are really powerful tools that I really appreciate your sharing, Jason. I think that all of those are good things for us to put on sticky notes and remind ourselves of, because it just keeps things in perspective. We are prone to, well, I speak for myself at least, prone to catastrophizing, blowing things out of proportion, right? And so this is all about kind of taking it down a notch. What are we really talking about here, right? And being more reality-based instead of emotion-based. And so I really want to thank you for your insights today. It's been so great having this conversation with you. And we are going to link to both of our TEDx talks in the show notes. So anybody who wants to check those out, please feel free to do so.
That's awesome. It's so great to be here and talk to you. I need to see your board. I'm imagining your office just being a board of sticky notes now with all of like the secrets to life on sticky notes in Kim's office.
I could take a picture for you. Oh, thanks again, Jason.
Okay, thanks, Kim.
Thank you for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you're listening to this, chances are you struggle with imposter syndrome or other confidence issues too. Please know that you are in great company. As an executive coach and former high-tech leader, I spent years battling imposter syndrome. There were times in my corporate life when I was absolutely sure that this was the moment that everyone would figure out that I didn't belong in the room. But it never happened. And through the years, with the help of research, coaching, and other resources, I've learned to help myself and others overcome self-doubt and advance our careers with strength and confidence. If you'd like to continue this conversation, please join my Leading Women Facebook group, where women of diverse roles, levels, and backgrounds come together to ask questions, share challenges, and support one another in a safe, trusted space that's difficult to find in the workplace. Check out the link in the show notes for more information on how to find us. And please join us again next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.